funny. Anyway, it's 9:01, so I'm going to begin to start. Can I just have a wave from those people who are looking at me to see, can you hear me? That's good. Thank you. Well, then let's start, please. Welcome everybody to this SEALA hosted webinar with the famous Dr. Jim Crupi. If you haven't had the Crupi experience, this is your opportunity. The rules of the game today is that everybody is currently muted apart from Jim and me. That's not because we only want to hear our voices, but to try to stop the echo and the feedback noise. However, Sophie is clapping, thank you. However, I hope for those of you who don't know Zoom too well that you've discovered that at the very bottom of the screen, if you move your mouse down there, you'll see participants in chat. If you click participants, you'll see how many people we have, but the chat is what I want to bring your attention to. That chat function is what we're going to use for running commentary if you want. All the hellos and claps are also welcome. But for questions, our plan is that we're going to have some questions at the end, a good question session. And so if you want to send a question, would you please send it to me privately? You see how to do that? Look at chat, go to the bottom, and you can distinguish who you want to send it to. If you send it to Adam Albion, then I will collect the questions as we go along on a running basis. If there's anything very, very pressing and interesting, my discretion will break into our conversation with Jim and ask that question. Otherwise, we'll have the questions at the end. All right? So our basic plan is we're going to start off by showing about 6 minutes of video. These are highlights from Jim's lecture on team building that he did at the MILA Masterclass, the MILA 10 Masterclass a few months ago. We're going to just run through the highlights there. Then he and I are going to engage in some high-level, hard talk and some conversation to try to dig through some of those points. And then we're going to open up to a general discussion. Okay? If you agree, you may nod and wave like that. That way I can see you. Thank you, everybody.
What if they don't agree?
If they don't agree, I hadn't even thought, we haven't got that provision. Jim, thank you for doing this. It's nice to see you. Where are you?
I'm in Atlanta today.
Today meaning you're always moving around, right? You're a peripatetic man.
I was somewhere else yesterday. Today I'm in Atlanta.
And he'll be somewhere else tomorrow. But with your help, you'll move us all somewhere else tomorrow. So without more ado, I'm going to invite Aisha to begin to show us the highlights of Jim's lecture from the MILA Masterclass. I'm going to hand it over to you, Aisha. What she should be arranging is for it to appear on the whole screen, so the rest of us disappear and we can merely focus on the presiding genius of Jim. If you want to do that for us, Aisha.
And the picker of these was Adam.
And we're off.
This is it right here. Trust. Without trust, there is no purpose. Without trust, there's no acceptance. Without trust, there's no communication. Without trust, there's no unity, no collaboration, no whatever, whatever, whatever. No trust, no team. End of story. Leadership is about involving people to get where you want to go. It's not just about making a decision. Anybody can do that. It's how you make the decision that's critical. Because in leadership, it's about bringing them along. It's about they want to say at the end, we did it. Not you did it, we did it. So the how of decision making is what separates a leader from a manager. We do interesting things to people who make suggestions. We destroy them. People who make suggestions are telling you something really important. And here's what they're telling you. I care. People don't make suggestions if they don't care. They don't even bother. You do not want to destroy that. These ideas come from anyone, but if they don't feel like they can say it, information is not power. Shared information is power. What makes you think you have all the answers? You need to pull the answers out of everybody. All that innovation, all that insight, pull it out and direct it. The day of the know everything leader is over. Not only do you not know everything, everybody knows you don't know everything. We're in the information age. If you think you have a premium on knowledge, you got to be kidding me. People who have ego problems cannot make the following statement. I don't know. People who can't say, I don't know, are insecure people. And they try to prove to you that they really do, when everybody knows they really don't. And they try to convince you they really do, when you know they really don't. And they keep pushing the fact that they really do, and you know they really don't. And the more they try to do that, the more you see their insecurities. And they think, oh, well, I can't say that because I'm a manager, I'm a leader, I'm supposed to know everything. If I let them see that I'm vulnerable, I'm destroyed. Actually, the opposite takes place. You got people working with you, I didn't say for you, with you, who know a lot more than you give them credit for. They just need to be released. And this is a big deal. This is one of your big deals, is release them. Create the environment where they say, I know how we can do this better. Why don't we try this? Your job is not to cover all the bases. You can't do it, you're going to burn out. There's too much you got to do. Your job is to make sure all the bases are covered. This is really important. Don't think you have to do everything. You've got to make sure other people are doing the things that are important. You cannot cover all the bases. You're going to run around, you're going to get tired, you're going to get fatigued, you're not going to be able to see where things are going, you're not going to be able to observe. Don't try to do it all yourself. What happens if you do it all yourself? A, you're going to burn out. B, they're going to let you. C, you know what you're telling me? Remember first day? What are you telling me? I don't need you. I don't trust you to do it. I've got to do it. Why would I want to even work for you when I know you don't trust me? You're not going to get the best out of me. So you may think, oh, well, let me show. I'm showing everybody how capable I am. No, that's not what this is about. It's not about you. It's about them, the people you work with. They're watching everything you do, and they only want to know the answer to one question. Is what you say consistent with what you do? That's all they want to know. Is what you say consistent with what you do? That's all they want to know. And you break that consistency, you break what? Trust.
Okay, now we're done.
Let's have a silent hand clap. Jim, it's powerful stuff, but it leads to a lot of questions. And I'm going to ask you the one that always comes to my mind, especially when I hear you give this message to the areas where we work in the MILA, the SEALA, and the SEALA. Because trust is a key word in your idea about how teams have to function. Teams, by the way, are not only in your workplace, but I presume that you need teams as supporting individuals around you in your life. And so trust better be operative in all the things that you do. But I want to know, what about respect? I don't see that a team can work unless they respect the team leader, believe him or her. So if you dare to be vulnerable, which you say shows trust, then how do you avoid this very fine line of losing respect when people know that you're being vulnerable? And I want to also immediately put this to you. I think that when a man shows vulnerability, it's different, or different problems arise than when a woman leader dares to show vulnerability. And I suggest that for her to show vulnerability and still retain the trust of her team is a much trickier thing, especially in the regions where we work. How would you explain how we're going to square this circle?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, no, if you don't have trust, you're not going to be respected. So trust underpins the notion of respect. I mean, I don't see a disconnect there. I think one is the foundation of the other. As far as vulnerability, I guess it depends on what you mean by vulnerable. If you see vulnerability as a sign of weakness because you're letting people see your humanity, that's one way to categorize it. One way to categorize it is vulnerability means that somehow you're making yourself exposed to the point that somebody could take advantage of that. My view of vulnerability is that you're willing to show your humanity, which means that you're willing to engage in an authentic discussion about what you know, what you don't know. I will accept that in different cultures, it can mean different things depending on whether you're a woman or a man. Some might argue that it's very difficult for men to show vulnerability, but when they do, they seem to be more human. Most guys I know tend to want to be macho in these things, and they interpret vulnerability as a sign of weakness, and therefore showing it is a negative in their minds. For me, it's simply being myself. I mean, it's being authentic. It's not being afraid to show you that, there are things I may not know. It's not the same as, showing some inherent personality weakness. It's not the same as showing that you're not together, so to speak. It's being authentic is what I mean by being vulnerable. The notion in the video, one of the things I said is people who cannot say I don't know are insecure people because their egos won't allow them to expose themselves by saying that I don't know. I think a lot of that's tied up in their notions of what it means to be a manager. Again, one of the things I said was, it's not the decisions you make, it's how you decide. It's also how you communicate. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what I say. It only matters what you hear. And that's really important to understand. It doesn't matter what you say. It only matters what they hear. And if they don't hear what you're saying, they will make different calculations. So the way in which you show your vulnerability, the how of showing vulnerability, in this case, I don't know, you can say, gee, I don't know, or I don't know, or, I'm not sure about that. What do you think? There's all kinds of ways to communicate this, and depending on who you are, male or female, it can be quite effective.
So authenticity, you mentioned a few times. Authenticity is the key to trust in what you're saying, right? And
Yep.
also the team has to be built on these shared bonds of trust and authenticity. But I'm going to tell you authentically, Jim, I screw up a lot of the times. I'm running off of a question here you have from Sophia Hagen. That is to say, we make mistakes all the time. We screw up as leaders. What happens when you don't do what you promised to do and your team sees that? Now, if you say, well, I screwed up, I don't know, that seems powerful at the beginning. But what if you're quite a way along the process? You're supposed to be leading the team to some result, and your decision, you screw up. Just leaders screw up all the time. Then how do you keep trust in the team?
I think you be honest about it. I made a mistake. We need to reset. What do you think? If you could have done this another way, how would you have done it? I mean, to me, it's a constant back and forth feedback. At the end of the day, you're bringing people in. You know, this is your responsibility to these people is to serve them well. And sometimes you make mistakes, and they recognize that. It's the people that aren't willing to reset and say, you know, we went down this path, we paid a heavy price for it. We need to rethink this. There's a couple of things I've now recognized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't stop there and say, we're going to go in this direction, because then they're going to say, well, you made a mistake, and why would we believe you going down this path? That would be, you're making yourself too suspect. So I would always bring them in. I'd say, look, you know, let's revisit this. It's worth talking about. You know, and maybe the issue was that they didn't believe it's the right way to do it anyway, but they didn't say anything because they felt like they couldn't. This is a great opportunity to bring that out. You know, like, did any one of you recognize that we might have problems in this area, or we might have made a mistake here? Somebody might raise their hand. Well, you know, is there a particular reason you didn't feel comfortable sharing that with a group? Not telling me. Notice the difference of my language. Telling me puts me in this authority position instead of the leader position. There's a difference. So to me, it's, and I would always say, okay, going forward, let's look at some options we could consider. Guess what? They may actually come up with a better way than you thought of all along. As long as you get there, and as long as where you're going is clear, and as long as you can rally everybody around that, yourself included, that's what's important.
So in this case, a mistake or a cock-up is it's like the lemons out of which you're advising us to make lemonade. In other words, at least it's an opportunity then to realign the process, to sort of to rediscover what you could have done and so on. Do you think that is enough? I have a question which I think is very pertinent from Duan, who says, is that enough to re-establish trust? You've made a mistake, so in a sense you've broken the trust. Isn't there some implicit contract? This is me asking you. Is there not some implicit contract in a team that you are going to lead that team to a successful result? If you don't do that, hasn't that trust been broken?
I think it depends on how you, the culture that you've helped create with the team. I mean, at the end of the day, the culture of the team resides a lot in how the leader operates within the context of the team. What does leading mean? You know, if leading means I'm going to make all the decisions, I'm going to tell you what to do, we're going in this direction, I'm not really interested in what you have to say. Well, you've created a culture. When there's a mistake in that culture, quote, a mistake in that culture, then people start attributing these things to you. But if you have not, if the culture you've created is, we're in this together, and along the way, mistakes are an opportunity for us to get even better. I think everybody on this call would probably say they've learned more from their mistakes than they've learned from the things they've done well, because typically very few people go back and look at what they've done well. They don't go back after they've done it successfully and say, oh, wow, what did we do that really contributed to that? And, you know, I think that's really important. So when you're, let's say you've got a team and you've accomplished something, I think it's really important to reward that by having a discussion about it. Like, okay, let's look at what just happened here. I mean, we were clicking on all cylinders. We got this right. This is fantastic. We got this right. Not I got this right, you know. And so the more you explore what you do well as always review what may have not gone well. Like even when you do well, I guarantee you it probably wasn't optimal most of the time, because achieving 100% is rare. So I think it's very important to have a discussion. Okay, you know, we did this. Is there something we could have done where we could have done it more effectively, more efficiently? It's about engaging the group in a discussion, because that involves them. You know, there's a saying, you know, tell me and I'll forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I will understand.
Mm. I think so many of us in a leadership role struggle with this idea of being humans, the sort of leadership role that I might have in my own family or community, versus the mask which I feel I have to adopt when I go to work. Not SEALA, of course. I'm completely authentic in my work at SEALA, but theoretically, in other jobs that I may do. And to try to just tease this out one more time, I'm quoting from your lecture here. You say, if you give the example of someone who says, if I show that I'm vulnerable, I'm destroyed. That's the fear that people have. Right. And then you make the comment, actually the opposite takes place. But I want to know, what is the opposite of being destroyed in this context?
Well, the opposite of being destroyed is a recognition that you're authentic, because you're willing to engage, you're willing to admit that you're not afraid of mistakes. That sends a very powerful message to the team, because what they hear you saying is, don't be afraid of making a mistake. You know, it's interesting, when Google hires people, one of the things they ask them is, have you ever made mistakes? And if somebody's not smart enough to say, oh, you know, I haven't made mistakes, or they'll say, what are your weaknesses? Well, I really don't have any weaknesses. Google doesn't hire them, because what they believe is the people who've made mistakes, the people who understand the weaknesses they may have learned from that and probably aren't going to make those mistakes again. That makes them more valuable. I mean, this is all about course correction. So that's one point. The other point is, I fundamentally do not believe, I think you're in real trouble if there's a difference between you at home and you at work. I think you're in real trouble. I think when you're not, you know, who you are has to come from the inside out. You start separating who you are at work from who you are at home, it's like you're schizophrenic. You know, if you're authentic, there is no separation. The way you handle your children is not any different than the way you'd handle a team. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all little kids in big bodies. And, you know, this is a human enterprise. Your kids are watching you. Your kids are trying to see what happens if you make a mistake. If you have the impression that you never make mistakes, that frames how your children will look at life. You're actually putting them in a prison when you do that. So I think a lot of this is really understanding who you are and making sure that what you do cannot be separated from who you are. Your avocation is your vocation. Who you are is an extension of what you do. You are not what you do. People whose identity is tied up around what they do, what happens? They lose their job, they're lost, because everything was, you know, everything was tied up in what they do. what you do has very little to do with who you are, unless it's an extension of who you are.
Well, let's look into that, because people recognize when we talk about teams, teams imply people around, collaboration, and so on. People understand that they have to go to work and function in a system. Systems are set up in order to have people arrayed in certain relationships to one another, which then you as a leader try to shape and craft and move forward. You are aware of the fact that you're working in a system. However, we deliberately called today's webinar Teams in Business and Teams in Life to try to capture this second aspect of how you need people to support and help and collaborate with you in life as well. But most people, when they leave work at, I was going to say at 5, but most of us leave work about 9, right? Then you think you're leaving the system behind. You don't realize that in fact, you're trying, that your life actually is surely also some kind of system in which you should be able to find a way to lead teams, we don't use this vocabulary, in your life, but for surely different goals. Now, I want to get to this. I want to know whether you really think, even if you're the same person, ideally at work and at home, you should be using the people around you in the same way at work, in a work system, and in your life to achieve similar goals, or is it completely different in your mind?
It's not any different in my mind. This is a human enterprise. The only difference is that in the lives of my children, for example, I have there's a certain relationship there that's been cast, right? The way they look at me from the beginning. And so I have to try to manage that. If I want to be able to be a good father and try to communicate with my children, they've got to try to understand. I've got to set the environment so that they feel free to have those kinds of discussions, even when they feel most vulnerable. I've got to understand that that I have a family and I have, like, for example, I have 2 children, okay? So when my wife and I had Shannon, our daughter, she was the oldest, she was the firstborn, we read to her 1,000,000 times. We had high expectations she was going to be all that she was capable of being. We took 1,000,000 pictures. She got sick. We freaked out. We were parents relatively clueless about being parents, but we were trying to do our best, okay? Shannon found out really fast that when her father said no, Shannon would go to her mother and her mother would get her father to move. In other words, it didn't take Shannon very long at all to understand that the so-called leadership structure, power structure of the family as defined by her father wasn't real. That there were these informal mechanisms that you could use. Our son Matthew comes along, he's got 3 parents. My wife and I and my daughter. Somehow we didn't take as many pictures. When Matthew got sick, we said, oh, we've done that before. Why are kids so different in the same family? The answer is they weren't born into the same family. Not even close. Understanding that about them and appreciating their differences is no different than understanding the backgrounds, what makes your team tick. I mean, this is really important. You can't look at people as functionaries in some task you're trying to accomplish. You've got to look at them as unique individuals. They have histories, they have trials and tribulations. The more you understand that, the more you're able to understand how to communicate to them and cast things in a way that they get excited, inspired, committed, whatever, to where things are going. Yes, you have to operate within a system, and it's your responsibility as a leader to try to influence the entire system that your team may be exposed to. And you can do that by the examples you set, without mentioning a name. I'm aware of someone who went to SEALA, and when they graduated, they went to back to work for their company, right? And one of the things they came out of SEALA wanting, understanding was they wanted to basically put on a party-like thing for guest workers. Had never been done before. Guy goes to the boss and the boss says no. The guy keeps pushing on this and finally gets his boss to say, well, you know, if you want to do it with your group, that's fine. He does it. People are crying. These guest workers were stunned, like nobody had ever said thank you before, which in essence what this was. Guess what happened to productivity in the next 3 months? It skyrocketed in his team. Guess what his manager decided to do once he saw that? So
What, Jim?
you can't divorce yourself from the system you're in, but you have to be strategic about shaping the environment you're in. Because after all, you're not the only one operating in that environment. And remember, this is about them, your team. You have to make sure that, to the extent that you can, that the environment around you actually contributes to their productivity, their satisfaction, the way they feel, because the way they feel and what they get interested in has everything to do with their performance. Because if they don't care and they're not interested, they'll just come to work and do their job and, okay, I'm doing my job, but you know, this is your company, this is your team, this isn't mine.
To what extent, however, do you motivate the teams to a goal? Because that's something that we all struggle with. We all have to set certain goals, and we have to set what the parameters and for our work are. And as we all know, famously they say, you know, if you want a friend and you're a leader, then get a dog. Your job is not to be popular. But once again, this feels different about how you would handle teams at work, or how you might handle them in your life. For example, what do you do, very simply, when you've got a goal at work and your team is, members of it don't want to do it, or unhappy about it, or don't understand why you're asking it, or don't agree with it? What happens then?
Oh, well, that's a very difficult situation. I mean, I think part of your responsibility is to help frame the goal in the context of why it's important. If you don't believe the goal is important in terms of lining up with the task, then you better start having discussions with people that created the kind of the big picture around which you're setting a goal for people to go after. The quote goal, I call it task clarity. I mean, people have to get really good at this, because that you make the task the leader, get your ego out of it, and get everybody looking at how that task gets accomplished. What's the optimal way? You know, this gets back to the how you make decisions. You know, if I get a group together and I say, here's the task, bam, 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 you get here, you get here, you get here, bam, we're going. What just happened? I made all the decisions. It's all on me. And they feel like they had very little to do with it. You think they're going to celebrate if we hit that target? No, we're not. They're not. I mean, okay, so we did it. That's not the same as setting a task that's very clear, stepping back, and then basically saying, all right, give me some ideas about how you think we could accomplish this. Even people who may feel that they have to really feel the goal was really wrong, for them not to start thinking about how they accomplish it. It's like, you know, I tell this story about UPS, you know, sitting down and they were trying to figure out, okay, how can we get more cost efficient with our drivers? And they got drivers together and said, look, what are your ideas? You're out there on the road all the time. What are your ideas about how we can be more efficient, cut costs, and basically in the US you can turn right on red, right? So they this is what they said: if you could route our routes so that we turn right on red every time, We wouldn't have to stop. We wouldn't be burning as much gas. We could get to places quicker. We could be more efficient at what we do, and we'd save lots of money. And they saved, you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars. That's not the same as some manager saying, we're going to go do this. Can you imagine what happened in UPS when those people came back and said, guess what, we're going to do this? They finally listened.
I see that it's extremely gratifying when somebody listens to you, especially somebody who, according to the power structure, doesn't necessarily have to do that. But I'm still perplexed about this. If I have found myself in my own work in the past, I assure you, working for people who I didn't necessarily agree with, or I was dubious about the vision, and yet I followed this person because at least I respected, it was a man in his certainty about it. I bought into I wasn't sure, but there's something about the vision. What I wanted to know, now that I think about it and listen to you, was it actually the vision itself? Because I'm telling you, I didn't think I agreed with it. Or was I so impressed with the way, with the how that this man made a decision, that even if I didn't agree with it, I thought, he's made such an effort to show me and the team what he wants to do. It is a coherent vision. It's a powerful idea. It's not my idea, that I am willing to follow because I'm so impressed by those things. Not the goal, not the task, but the clarity with which the task was set made me sort of buy into the task. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you answered your own question.
Well, I'm not sure, but tease it out for me, because what happened at that time? And how does that fit into your general ideas about teams?
Well, I mean, the answer to your question lies in the power of leadership when done correctly. So, for example, maybe you don't necessarily agree with the vision. You don't think it's possible, right? But if you have respect and confidence in the leader, you'll accept some decisions, some goals that maybe you don't completely agree with, because you respect them. So let me ask you a question. When you were doing that, did you feel that you would have a hand in materializing that vision? I'm
not sure. I was too young to think that I knew anything.
Okay.
But I knew that I was probably, here's what I'm trying, this is the balance I'm trying to understand. If I was buying into this because the leader convinced me of the vision and I was impressed by his leadership, then if he stumbled, he took responsibility for it, did he not? And then we would have got back to the discussion before about, he made a mistake, he's lost our respect. He didn't have the expertise we thought he had.
Yeah, the answer is that if the leader in that instance doesn't take responsibility, he's digging his own grave without knowing it. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I think people are smart enough to know that nobody gets things right 100%. It's the people that then turn around and blame you for not accomplishing the mission, or aren't willing to say, you know, I was wrong about this. Now that I've thought about it, you said something along the path that I should have paid more attention to. I mean, this is how you gain the respect of people. And yeah, I agree. I don't think it's about being popular. You try to be popular and liked, you're going to make a lot of wrong decisions. And the day you make a decision that goes against being popular is the day they will desert you. It is about being respected. And the way you get respected is you are able to build trust and a fluidity in a way that having discussions and conversations about this are more natural than top down. You know, I think if you look at yourself as a leader as top down, you're already starting to walk down the wrong path. You know, it's like a pyramid, right? If you think you're at the top of the pyramid, you're in trouble. The truth is, you take the pyramid and flip it upside down. You're at the bottom of the pyramid. They're at the top of the pyramid. There's a CEO in the Mila region who likes to tell the story about, and he's known for really taking care of his people, and people know that, and they know he makes decisions, and he's made some big decisions, not all of them have been right, but they respect him, they're willing to follow him. He loves to tell this story. He says, how many of you have seen a cowboy movie? All these hands go up. How many of you have seen a cowboy movie that has a hanging in it? All these hands go up. And he said, so here's the way I look at it. This is the CEO talking. The noose around my neck is my board. The horse that I'm on, or the table I'm standing on, is the company. It's all the people. Have you ever seen a cowboy in a movie where he's going to get hung? Have you ever seen him look up? He never looks up. He always looks down, because he knows if that table's kicked out from under him, or the horse takes off, he's dead.
Very nice.
That's the way you have to look at it.
Friends, we're going to move into officially a question and answer session. I have some questions which are being sent. If you have more, send them along, and I'll try to do justice to them. I'm going to start you off, Jim, with a question. It happens to be from Sophia again. It's about suggestions. Remember, you talk a lot about suggestions. You want suggestions from the team, but you don't have to accept everything that the team suggests, obviously. You have to filter them out. So can you suggest a way, actually, or even a specific tool to gather suggestions in the team, and so that the team feels ownership in the decisions, and then you could build trust, but without being so open-ended that it feels like just a whole collections of suggestions, but no clarity to them?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things you can do. One is, let's say you're in an environment where you've got a task to accomplish, a goal to accomplish, and you're with your team, okay? And you've created an environment where people actually feel free to give you suggestions, right? They're not, to them, this is normal. This is not something unusual. And so you'll ask somebody for, what are your suggestions? So I think you try to initiate it. Or if somebody makes a suggestion and you're in a team environment, what I do is I turn to another team member and say, what do you think about Adam's idea? How would you improve on that? I try to get a discussion going so that everybody, somebody say, well, what if we did it this way? Or now if I'm individually, then I say, okay, great suggestion. What do you think the flaws are in that suggestion? What's the downside if we adopt that suggestion? Rather than saying, here are the flaws. See, I'm always wanting people to understand how to solve the issue, not just make a suggestion. Part of my responsibility to them as a leader is to teach them how to be better decision makers and to begin to appreciate what the view looks like from my perch. Because I may see it slightly differently because I've got more information, more data. And sometimes I'll recognize when they make a suggestion, they don't have all the information. So I say, what if I were to tell you, here's a factor we have to consider? They come out, maybe they adjust it. But I force them to defend the suggestion, but not in a negative way, in a way that facilitates insight. And then, I may say at the end, look, there's some really good ideas here. Maybe the issue is that this would be better served if we did it later, or we're past that point, or I really appreciate your insight. It's helped me better frame what we might do and how we might do it going forward, even though the base aspect of the purity of the particular suggestion isn't something we're going to adopt right now. But again, it's all about what kind of environment have you created. If you have created an environment where somebody makes a suggestion, you slap them down, or no, it's not important, well, that's the kind of behavior you're going to get, right? You're going to get a bam, stop. They'll never make a suggestion again. If you've created the environment where it's about discussing the nature of what you're trying to accomplish together, and nobody's intimidated by having that discussion, and everybody is smart enough to realize, or at least have become conscious enough to realize that that all suggestions cannot be adopted, you know, and they're not intimidated by that, and they don't take it personally. They take it as part of a process.
And that process is an inquiry, that you throw out an idea, you get feedback, and create a feedback loop. That's what you're just, and that way more people can contribute their ideas to it as they go along.
Yeah, and hopefully the other thing you learn about things from suggestions is how clear were you in the goal of the task that you set. Right. Because the more suggestions or comments about it means probably you were less clear about it. Now, there are instances where you have to take a stand. And I mean, it's a hard stand. And we're going in this direction, da-da-da-da. I think those instances, those kinds of situations are more rare than most people in leadership positions think they are. But here's the thing: if you have trust, and if you've created this culture of facilitated commentary around accomplishing the goal so that you maximize the ideas of the team, then when you take these positions, they're not going to be freaked out about it. They're not going to say, oh my gosh. Right. They're going to say, wow, this must be really important. I mean, at that point, you've established trust, and they'll give you leeway. Notice I said they'll give you leeway. Right. You'll take it, right? But in a lot of ways, you lead because they let you lead. You know, it's, right. I mean, it's, and people that don't understand this are really in trouble. Right.
Well, I'm going to complicate the situation a little bit to make it a little more realistic. We've been working with a rather simplistic model of leadership where we've been talking about a leader and there's his or her team. But in real life, in fact, there are different levels of hierarchy, and indeed different leaders and different people in authority putting different kinds of pressure on that team, sometimes from different directions. I'm going to conflate a couple of questions that I've seen here to ask you about what I'm going to call the guardianship role that you have over your team. Although you are making the case that we're all equals, or indeed the leader might be the first among equals in a team, still there is a special role that the leader has towards his or her team, which is not shared by anybody else in that team. And that is a protective function, a guardian function in some way. And often that guardianship may have to be exerted against other people in the organization who are putting different pressures on that team. So here's a question, for example. I've got a team, and I know that my team is working full out. I know that my team is killing itself in the best gym-like model of work that I have adopted. However, there's somebody parallel in the organization to me, or maybe who we all report to, who does not think the team is doing so well, and maybe has some negativity about them, has words that can deflate the team, and I don't have any control over that. How can I guard and protect my team? Because I think I have a duty of guardianship to keep that team safe and secure from other people in the organization who unwittingly may actually be trying to undermine us.
Yeah, I think a leader has a responsibility for helping, I'll use the word protect, the team from the flaws of itself.
Okay.
So that's number one. And number two, I think the leader, as part of understanding how to be an effective leader, needs to understand the environment they're operating in. And that means analyzing the opportunities, the threats, the negativities if you're not aware of this in the context of the larger group, then you're not going to be as effective, because part of it is, if there are things you disagree with, then you have an explanation. You have a responsibility to explain that to the team why it is that this particular goal is being lined up in a different way. Or you have a responsibility to go to the people around you and have a conversation about them, about the impact of what it is they're doing that is causing a negative impact on the team you're leading. I mean, it's not all about just being isolated in your own team. I said earlier, you have a responsibility to help shape the environment that you operate in, not just lead your team. Because if you can't help shape that environment, then your team's probably not going to be as effective in the context of that environment. This is hard. And this is why I said earlier, you know, your job is not to cover all the bases. Your job is to make sure all the bases are covered. If you're trying to cover all the bases, you don't have time for this. You know, you put out fires, you do it all yourself, and you don't have time to step back and look at the bigger picture and say, what is this environment contributing? How is this environment contributing or taking away from towards the goal we're trying to reach? I have a responsibility to have that conversation with the other leaders in the organization. The way I look at it is, in any organization, I've never looked at, I'm like a leader and my responsibility is to do X, Y, Z, and that's it with my team. I've always looked at it as, I have a responsibility to not just lead this team, I have a responsibility to lead this organization. And if I can contribute to those discussions and get them to see things they may not ordinarily see, then good. And what I've learned a lot of times is that some of the people that are creating negative images or negative comments about a team environment or what some particular individual in a team may be doing, what I've learned is I can trace that almost 95% to their childhood. Something happened to them in their family. They had a father that was overbearing. They had somebody who did this to them or did that to them, and they materialize this. And so what I do is I go to a person and say, and I'll say something like, you know, John, you know, you may not appreciate what you're actually doing and its effect on the team I'm trying to lead or this organization. Or I'll say, you know, Adam, that was out of character. I know you. Is there something else going on here that has nothing to do with this company? And those discussions come out. It's no different than, quite frankly, this goes back to family. You know, it's no different than a conversation I'd have with my wife or my children. You know, it's you don't ever want to, you know, insult the dignity of people, and that's can be done very easily. You know, most people are, it's sad to say this, but most people are actually surprised when you have these kinds of discussions, because in engaging in them, they're caught off guard, because what you're saying is, you know, this is what you're saying, you're not saying it this way. You are valuable enough to me to have this discussion. And we both have to understand the impact of it.
Because most people do assume, or have always assumed, that work is a four-letter word, and that you go as a different person to work, and you expect different sets of relations than you have around your family kitchen table.
Yeah, I spent 4 years in the American military, right? And as a commander, there were times when you just have to make a decision. We're doing this, right? But I never believed my rank had anything to do with whether I was a leader or not. Your title means nothing. Zero. Nothing. It does not define you as a leader. It's a title. When you start paying attention to that as who you are, this title, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So I always believed in, how do I gain the trust, and how do I, because I know there are going to be times when I'm going to have to make decisions in unbelievable chaos and urgency. And boy, I better have their trust at that moment when things are really hard. When things are easy, it's not a big deal. And maybe that's why I'm more sanguine about this kind of stuff. You know, in the corporate sector, there's no life and death. You know, it's just a job, you know, and we're all trying to accomplish things that mean something, hopefully contribute to the livelihoods of people. And this is the way I look at business. You know, I admire people who build businesses. Why? Because they're affecting people's lives, making it possible for them to eat, making it possible for them to have a place to live. And I've always seen myself as a steward of that.
Well, I think for sure that there are very few of us who, as leaders or commanders, are ever going to have to take decisions which are as important as Army commander under fire. I hope not, anyway. In our last minutes, I'm going to again put together a number of questions which have rightly pointed out that although all of us like to think of ourselves as leaders and have come to perhaps this webinar with that mentality, thinking about how we're going to help our teams, in reality, most of us are foot soldiers, in the sense that we all have bosses, we all have people whom we are responsible to looking up, and most of us are members of teams. So in that sense, what responsibility, not the leader to the team, but I'm a member of the team now, what responsibility do I have to try to help and encourage and manage my leader? In other words, does it work equally well? Do I also have to encourage authenticity, vulnerability, and the rest, and trust up in him or her, or is it just one way down?
No, it's never one way down. If it was one way down, you don't have a team.
So do I have responsibilities?
Of course.
Not only to my team members, but to my commander as a leader.
Of course.
What are those responsibilities?
To challenge them when you think they're wrong.
That's not a privilege. That's a responsibility of mine to call out my leader.
Yeah.
That's a good way to get me to the door.
No, the how you call out your leader is what matters. If you call out your leader in front of everybody else, you can forget it. You're destroying their dignity in front of the group. That's dumb. You know, I mean, if you have a conversation with your leader, you know, so I do a lot of work with companies, and what I say when people bring this problem to me is I say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go up to the person that's leading this team, and I want you to tell them that there's something really important you want to talk to them about. And you want to do it off-site. You don't want to do it in the company, which is, quote, the turf of management, right? You want to do it off-site. And the way I begin that discussion, because I've done this myself, is I've said, you know, I want to have a man-to-man, man-to-woman discussion with you. This is not easy for me to do, but I feel I owe it to you to tell you some things that you may not be aware of.
Hold on.
That's my responsibility.
Keep that thought, because let's imagine this, that we're talking about how to keep a team going when it's working well. Now let's imagine that a lot of us actually, for good or ill, have been bad managers, we've been bad leaders. Our teams are not working well, but now we've seen the light thanks to Jim and SEALA and this webinar. I'm going to go back and I want to fix it. I've got a team at the moment which is spreading negativity around the management and leaders. Now, what measures can I take to correct that?
Have a discussion with the team about why that's happening. What are you negative about? Why? Do you understand the permutations of having those discussions, and as you talk about them, how they can spread and what that does, not only to the organization, but to your teammates? What's an alternative way in which to fix the problem instead of fix the blame? It's pretty easy, you know. I mean, it's not easy. It's all in how you think about what leadership means. I mean, people, you know, this isn't science. Leadership is an art. It's not a science. There are scientific elements to management. There aren't scientific elements to leadership. And that means that it's an affair of the heart, not just an affair of the head. And one of the things that strikes me is, so you think of your heart is a muscle, it pumps, right? But it's like a sponge. So a sponge soaks in water. When you squeeze the sponge, water goes out. What does that metaphor really mean? You bring in negative stuff, you squeeze that sponge, negative stuff goes out. You have a certain perspective about people that's negative, you pump it, it goes out, your orientation is negative. It's how you, regardless of what you say, it's how you are seen. And this is why I said earlier in one of those clips, you know, people really want to know, is what you say consistent with what you do? And if there's no consistency, you're not going to have trust, you're not going to have respect, they're not going to listen to you because they're going to say, what's the point? She doesn't walk the talk.
Right.
They talk a good game, but they don't play a good game.
In other words, is a consistency between what you say and what you do.
Yeah.
Well,
if you know, can you imagine if I took my child into work and they started seeing a different person at work than they saw at home? Can you imagine the problem with that? And that's why I don't think you can separate the two. You know, are there sophisticated, complex things that go along with leadership, things you have to think about? Yeah, but the way in which you handle them is what matters. There are managerial aspects. There are processes that you can put in place like Six Sigma and processes like that are important, right? But the question is, are you putting Six Sigma or something like that in place because you think it's the best thing to do and you just tell people this is what we're going to do? Or do you spend time in trying to explain and show them why this matters and the impact it can have? And along the way, as you're going through this process, are there things you think we could do to make this process even better? You know, like what can you do to contribute to this process concept that would make it even better? Now they start getting in. Now they're starting to think about not just what they're doing, but how they're doing it and how it contributes to the end state that you're trying to achieve. Mm. And they start making suggestions. Mm. I mean, it's a cycle. Mm. And if you kill those suggestions, like they're not important, or you have a culture where they're afraid to say anything, I'm just going to do my job, you're not getting the most out of them. You're losing the whole synergy of the team. And, it doesn't, you have to look at these people as people first. You know, they're not a cleaner of a rug. They're not a janitor. They're not a worker on the assembly line. They're a human being that comes to work so they can make money to feed their families, and they just want to do their job and do it best. And if you can contribute to that and at the same time raise them as people and their own self-image and what that means to the group, because most people spend more time with people at work than they do with their own families. You know, it's the family away from home is the way I look at it. You know, your family is who you were born with by blood. Your workers, your coworkers, and your friends are your family by choice. So it's all in how you look at the people themselves. You know, if they're just functionary, some cog in a wheel, that's a big mistake. They will do their job. Don't get me wrong. They will do their job, but are they going to be optimal? Are they going to look for ways to improve what they're doing and who they are? No. It's your company. It's not mine. You have that kind of attitude, you've lost everything,
Right.
in my view.
Right. I think in the view of your whole audience here, I do believe that this sort of vision of leadership as kindness or compassionate leadership is something which I think is common to actually all the vision that this network, this family of leadership networks that we have assembled today, buy into. I think it's maybe one of the core values that join us all and make us one set of organizations, one family of organizations.
Well, can I add something to that? Because compassion and kindness can be interpreted a certain way. And I don't want people to get the wrong impression, you know, that this is one big love fest, because it's not. You know, there's something called tough love, right? Where you just have to do things with people sometime, and it's hard, and they're going to hurt. But you just have to be there for them, and you have to really be smart about the fact that at the end of the day, they will see the benefit. It's not easy that, you know, this is why you get paid the big bucks, right? I mean, as leaders, nobody said leadership was easy. It's not. But if you have the right culture and they know you care about them, even though you may be tough with them, it's like your children. If they know that you love them unconditionally, they may not like some of the things that you're saying they need to do or suggest that they need to do or things like that. But at the end of the day, they will know that you're doing it in their interest. Now, they may not learn this. If they're teenagers, they don't learn this till later. You know, at some point they go, oh, I remember when my mother or my father said this. And, you know, look, when I was 13, I told my mother she was ruining my life. So, I mean, part of this is, you know, and then later on in life, I realized, oh my God, you know, the things she was doing helped shape me. You know, my dad, my dad said a lot of things, but one of the things he said I've never forgotten about, and it ties to leadership. He said, the only thing I've given you that God didn't is your name. Don't screw it up. My mother said to me, who was a little bit softer, she said, Jim, just remember, the higher up that ladder you go, the more your rear end's going to show.
And on that note, friends, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you. Like a movie, I'm going to put the credits at the end now. I'm Adam Albion. I'm the director of SEALA. I want to make a shout out and thanks to Aisha Shaukatullah, our network manager, for helping put all this together so well, to Sophia and to the community team that mandated this set of webinars that I think is only the first of a series that we look forward to welcoming you to in SEALA. For those of you who are guests of SEALA, who didn't know SEALA, or even a few people are not members of our leadership academies yet but are interested, thank you, and I hope that you like to see what we do. And finally, I'm going to quote a message I think you've all seen here from Anand Sharma, but I think it captures what we all want to say. This is from Anand to you, Jim, on behalf of all of us. Hi, Jim. Thank you very much for this webinar. We cherish your friendship and support for SEALA and for all the leadership academies. A silent clap and for Jim. Thank you, Jim, for a wonderful webinar.
Well, thank you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. And it's my great loss that I haven't met a lot of you. As most of you know, I've been really engaged in the SEALA network, and that takes a lot of time. I'm sure Anand can attest to that. It takes a lot of your energy and your time. But please understand that I view all of you, regardless of what network you're in, as an extended part of my family. And I'm not just saying that, I really mean that deeply. So thank you for allowing me this brief moment into your lives. My very best to you and your families.
Thank you, everybody. See you at the next webinar.
Take care. Thanks, Adam.
Bye, everybody.